Thank you all for coming today and for a panel discussion about engineering as an ecosystem driver. We have with us two excellent presenters, Dan O'Keefe and Jeff Brock, who give two different perspectives from the state as well as the institutional perspective about role of engineering in driving the Connecticut ecosystem. Jeff is the Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences here at Yale. I think I would say that I've been at Yale long enough to have known a few engineering deans, and I think Jeff brings a different perspective and a much greater orientation toward opportunities to collaborate with industry and think about entrepreneurial opportunities for school, and I'm sure he'll talk about that a bit. Jeff is a graduate of Yale College, I think earned his PhD in mathematics from Berkeley, and has been on the faculty of a few different institutions, including Brown before coming to Yale, and some of his most recent research, which I don't understand, and I think involves the geometric analysis of large data sets. My rough way of summarizing that. Dan is the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development and Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Connecticut. He is a Brown graduate, a Harvard MBA graduate, a long, successful career in tech investing. And I think during the course of that career also had a very sort of a thread running through his career of orientation and commitment to public service. And in late 2023, he joined the Lamont administration as Chief Innovation Officer. Early 2024, he was appointed Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, and he's been a fantastic partner for Yale, for UConn, for other institutions in the state, not just as a investment partner with us as we're trying to leverage our strength in research, especially around quantum and engineering fields to promote economic development in the state, but also in that process has interjected a degree of discipline in how we think about opportunities, what are the market opportunities, and how we position ourselves. And so really fortunate to have the two of them with us today. I will ask a few questions with our colleagues, and we'll have room for time at the end for you to toss off some questions. And I thought I might start with Dan and pose a question to you that the governor has initiated with the support from the legislature a number of programs that are investing in communities, such as the Community Investment Fund, the plans for redevelopment of brownfields and workforce development and innovation clusters. And can you just talk a bit about the threads that run through all of those initiatives from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. And first of all, thank you for the introduction. You were overly generous and overly kind. But I do come from an investment background. So everything you just described is the parts of this job that were actually kind of comfortable for me. There are lots of parts of this job that are incredibly uncomfortable. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. Thankfully, I've got some great people that work with us that do. But this particular area is one that I was excited about because if you think about a career in investing, I spent, the last 25 years trying to think in 10-year terms and invest in 5-year terms. That was kind of what investing was for me. I wanted to make sure I was thinking about what the future might look like. But if you're managing an investment fund, you can't, at some point your investors want their money back. So you kind of invest in 5-year terms. Now in this world, I get to think in 50-year terms and invest in 25-year terms. You really start to think about what the long term can look like and work backwards and start to think logically and hopefully strategically about some of the things that we can do now to set us up for success in that future. And the biggest thing I spend time thinking about is comparative advantage. In my old world, it was competitive advantage. What are the things that this company is better at than anybody else, and can those areas of advantage sustain? Comparative advantage is the same thing, but for a state. What are the things that we're really good at? By the way, what are the things that we're not so great at but need to be if we're going to be successful in the future? And what you just described are some of the programs that are really investing in our communities. So Community Investment Fund is our biggest program. That's an $875 million program where we're investing in just what it sounds like, the vibrancy of our communities. Now you might say, well, how does a park or a sidewalk or a street lamp or what have you, how does that protect comparative advantage? Well, remember we're talking about the state of Connecticut. One of the biggest advantages we have here is quality of life. And I've said this morning, so I'm repeating it maybe for some of you. That used to be soft and fluffy. That used to not be economic comparative advantage. But then the pandemic happened. And now people are able to have more flexibility on where to live. So actually, things like quality of life, things like quality of healthcare, things like quality of education, the soft and fluffy reasons why I moved my family here in 2011 now are actually economic comparative advantage. We need to continue to invest and extend the vibrancy of those communities. Brownfields is taking down these old industrial sites. So traveling around the state, I'm sure you've seen it. I referred to one as a dystopian hellscape, and the press loved that and ran with it for a while. And it's funny, the governor was leaving right after I said that, and his window goes down, and he goes, did you just say dystopian hellscape? I'm like, yeah, look at this thing. It's one of these old plants that was built in the 1960s, 70s, where we used to light all these things on fire to produce energy. We still do it, by the way, but we're getting better. And now what brownfields does is take them down, which gives us an opportunity to reinvent that area. And that's really important for the state of Connecticut, because we're a land-constrained state. This isn't Texas or any of these other states where they have lots of green fields, undeveloped lands. We have to reclaim legacy economic use cases and reinvent them for future economic use cases. And that's exactly what brownfields does. It takes down these sites, remediates them, which we need to do with public dollars, because others aren't willing to take on that risk in the private sector. And then that helps get it ready for redevelopment and to create something incredible. And by the way, side benefit, because these sites needed water for either cooling or the movement of material, whatever, they dot our entire waterfront. So not only are we reclaiming these sites, but we're actually reclaiming our waterfront.
If I can just throw a follow-up question at you. The Innovation Clusters Program is a significant initiative that the governor announced earlier this year, and I know that you're still very much in the final process of evaluating applications, so you can't comment on that, but talk a little bit more about the strategy and the goals of that program.
Yeah, no, I can comment. I can go rogue.
Yeah.
I think of, it's called the DECD, right? So it's economic development and it's community development. So I think of the world in those two buckets. What I just described is community development, extending the vibrancy of our communities with a particular focus on those communities that need it most. Then there's economic development, and it's the same exercise. It's sitting down and saying, okay, what are the strongest parts of our economy? What are the largest, most meaningful parts of our economy? Thinking about what the future and the forward economy can look like, and then working backwards. And if I go down the stack ranking of our largest industries, so the state of Connecticut, just going down the list, it's finance, insurance, it's healthcare, including biotech, it's professional services, it's advanced manufacturing in support of our national defense. Those are our largest sectors. Every single one of those is being fundamentally redefined by some of these emergent technologies. This is not just arm-wavy stuff from a tech nerd. This is going to fundamentally redefine those industries in some incredibly compelling ways. So the question you ask yourself is, okay, are we going to do that? Are we going to be the ones to take advantage of that? Or are we going to let somebody else do it? And you know the answer. So innovation clusters, we did announce it. What I can talk about is we do have 3 finalists. The 3 finalists are, one is centered around the application of artificial intelligence in financial services, one, the application of both quantum and AI in biotech and drug discovery, and one, the application of artificial intelligence and quantum in insurance services and advanced manufacturing. Everything I just described is exactly what that is. That is taking advantage of these next generation horizontals and making sure we support their deployment into some of our most strategic industries to make sure those industries continue to thrive.
Great, thanks. Jeff, I mentioned that in your introduction that I think you're a dean brings a different perspective to the role of the school and what's the opportunities and possibilities for the school. I think you also have substantial investment resources available to you from Yale. I think Yale's investing around $2 billion in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. I like to say we're also increasing the size of the faculty by about 1/3. Can you talk about your strategic plan and where you want the school to go?
Sure. Well, a little bit on the some of the points Dan made in terms of really coming into a role where you see an opportunity. It's not necessarily this wasn't my kind of sweet spot in terms of my career up to this point. I was I'm a pure mathematician. I was the chair of the math department at Brown, but I think and we were just chatting before the panel about what a place like Providence has done to leverage the university to build a tech ecosystem. And I think when I was recruited here, so I was engaged in various ways in that project, but the scale of the opportunity with Yale and with the investment that Yale was prepared to make and with the investment Connecticut was teeing up to make just was extremely compelling to me. So we moved down here and started taking on these challenges of really transforming the whole perception at Yale about what engineering can be. And this is, a 100-year project, maybe even a 300-year project if you go back to the beginning of the institution. There's a rich, deep history in engineering, and I was really moved by the opportunity to kind of reclaim that as a excellence center on the campus. Part of why, though, is by looking at places like, Palo Alto, of course, but Pittsburgh, Albany, these other cities that have really revitalized themselves around a tech ecosystem. And you see that in biotech in New Haven, but you see it growing now, I think, as a result of some of the efforts we've made. And what I think is a really important element of that is this sense that we're in a conversation with the state, we're in a conversation with the federal government, thanks to you, Rich, and we see opportunities to leverage investment toward the larger goal of economic development, economic vitality in the city. In terms of the strategic plan, I joined the campus and the school at a moment when the science strategy broadly had been defined, but there was this big question mark on the page that talked about engineering, where the senior administration wasn't quite sure what they should do with engineering, and they left it to the school to define its strategy. So all this is sort of in the backdrop of quantum has been defined as a strategy, neuroscience has been announced as a strategy, planetary solutions has been announced as a strategy at Yale. So we were left to sort of talk about how we could complement that, but what directions we should also go on our own. AI really spoke to us, and this was before the ChatGPT moment. We knew AI was going to be a really important part of anything that engineering is involved in. So we talked about AI, we talked about robotics, which of course now is picking up the AI wave. Likewise, materials science, you mentioned additive manufacturing, seems like a really important point for us. But mostly we wanted to zero in on this. How can we change the narrative? How can we change the culture around engineering? How can we get out of this engineer-scientist modality to engineer-innovator, engineer-entrepreneur? And I think we're getting there. We've had our third year of Roberts Fund, this accelerator fund that's running out of the School of Engineering awards. And those technologies are starting to make it into the marketplace. We've seen some great VC pickup on those. And I just hope that, and I'm encouraged by the state's presence in those conversations, whether it's these innovation clusters, whether we're able to bring in the quantum CT grant, hopefully from the NSF eventually. Those are big turning point moments for the city and for the state. So, Yale as a partner to that, I think is a really important mission for us.
Now, Dan, it was interesting in your discussion of the 3 finalists for the Innovation Cluster Award. AI came up in, I think, 3, quantum came up in 2. And so those of us who had those of us at Yale and UConn and the city and Al Green had the pleasure of working with you on our Quantum Connecticut application. You really pushed us to be thinking about it's not just quantum, it's AI and quantum integrated. And I gather that the governor announced that it's quantum AI and Connecticut.
I swear I didn't ask him to
do
that.
But it's fine. Subtle pressure on us. You can continue. Yeah. And I think we also, with your encouragement and prodding, we're also thinking very actively about how does this new technology augment the existing strengths of the Connecticut economy.
Right.
Talk about that some more in your strategy.
And look, first I want to acknowledge just how important this partnership is. Yeah. So what we're all describing here is constituencies so what I am so used to is getting together with someone and talking about how we can profit from something, right? That was the tech investing world. How can we invest in something so everybody can make a bunch of money? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a capitalist, don't get me wrong. But let me just tell you how powerful it is when you get together with institutions and folks that are focused on what can we do to actually change the world? What can we do to actually change the lives of our children and grandchildren? Now that's probably a little bit more, that's grandiose than I mean it to be, but this concept of thinking about things, about what is right over the incredible long term is unbelievably intellectually stimulating. And when you do it with partners like these, and I want to acknowledge Michael Cryer, who's in the audience, who's Vice Provost of Research here at Yale and is also a partner in Quantum CT, as well as Premier Alpay, who I haven't seen but might be here, who has the same role at University of Connecticut. These are the real thought partners when we sort of sit down and talk about what some of these things are and what they could be. Now, the concept of quantum and AI, they are sort of cousins, right? They're both incredibly interesting and likely to be commercially impactful horizontal developments in the technology landscape. But at the same time, you got to navigate a little bit of where they apply, when, and why. In the case of quantum, that in terms of its broad commercial applicability, we're some time out. I like to remind everyone, as we all should, that quantum was literally conceived or partially conceived here a half mile from this campus at Yale. And I think a lot of the innovation will continue to be driven by the Quantum Institute at Yale. So having Yale as a partner, I think, has been incredibly helpful. And then on the AI, that commercial applicabilities they're just more near term. So I do actually think we should think about both, because what I'm focused on is if you really want to put your mind against what the world can look like and what that can mean for our society and for our economies, then you really need to think about all broad developments of technology, what all of these waves look like, and make sure we're training our workforce, getting the right resources in place to take advantage of all of them. Now, the collaboration is called Quantum CT. The governor did call it Quantum AI. Mike, I swear I didn't ask him to do that. But I do think at some point we do want to think about, and we already are, what the applicability of all of these technologies are for our industries.
Right. Thanks. And Jeff, you mentioned Roberts Fund briefly in your previous comments, and the technology transfer from the School of Engineering to industry, it occurs in a number of different ways. It's partly through long-term research collaborations, partly it's licensed inventions. It's also the know-how of your graduates to go out and do things. And talk about how you see all those in parallel, interweaving some of the initiatives underway at the school in addition to Roberts Fund.
Yeah, well, I think it's been an exciting time because what has had to happen is some acknowledgement that we need to evolve the way we think about our whole structure, our whole process of innovation. So rather than being head down in the laboratory, trying to publish the next paper and trying to do the best science, which we should always endeavor to do, we had to figure out how to inject the moment when, as you progress through a discovery process, if one graduate student comes to you with an idea, that you say, hey, maybe that's something that we could turn into a company. Maybe we could turn this into a process. Maybe we could turn this into some new, we heard about a millivolt computing system today, whereas we've always thought of this as something that has to occur with a certain voltage. You can drop the voltage way down and you can take kind of garbage parts and put together a new AI supercomputer. So, I mean, who thought of that? I don't know. So, so that was a great moment, right? And these things keep happening. And what we didn't have at Yale was that pause button where we say, okay, look, stop. Let's think about whether we could commercialize this. Let's get Yale Ventures in the door. Let's get our folks thinking about what's patentable, what might not be patentable. And the truth is that surrounding those folks with the right kind of entrepreneurs in residence, engineers in residence, that's another kind of category of assistance that we need to work on. People will come up with ideas, but they don't know how to write the app to actually deploy the idea. So building that structure is what has been missing, but it takes investment, and it takes upfront investment in the fund and in the ways that we think about how to supplant or supplement the work that's going on in the laboratory. But after a couple of rounds, we weren't really sure how it was going to go. But the first round, we had something like 45 applicants for 10 spots, and next year it was 60. So somehow the notion that this was okay at Yale was really the bar we had to cross, that it was permissible even to go out and do this kind of innovation, which had been more commonplace on the med school side of campus, frankly. So we were emulating them to a certain extent. But now this is filtered all the way down to our undergraduates. They're coming to campus thinking about not just like, what job am I going to get when I graduate? They're thinking about what did they do that they could take and turn into an innovation. So they're coming to us, they're coming to Josh, they're coming to me and saying, hey, I have this idea. What should I do? Should I just move to Silicon Valley for a year? And we're saying, please don't. Please hang around. Please work with our faculty on this, and trying to provide them the right portals to do that. So it's this culture transformation that a place like Yale absolutely has to support this. And I think we've now gotten to a place where the senior administration all recognizes that that's the case, and engineering is a great place for them to do that work.
Now, Dan, as a senior state official with a long history in tech investing, and I think both a highly detailed and equally broad view of the state economy, what do you expect from Jeff, or what do you expect from Mike and Premier? What would you say to them if Premier were here about expectations and how they should conduct themselves?
I say it to them all the time.
Yeah.
So it's going to be just keep going.
Yeah.
This investment in the tech campus, I think it's the largest capital investment Yale has made in its history. $2 billion. I hadn't heard the number 1.5. Sounds like it's $2 billion. So $2 billion investment in the city of New Haven, with a focus on tech and STEM. Like, think about what that means for an institution like Yale to make that kind of forward investment. Our UConn and Yale are the state of Connecticut's two R1 research institutions, meaning top of the food chain, if you will. They had never collaborated at this level before. in their storied histories, those two had never come together the way they are now. Part of that is I think Mike and Premier have a strong personal relationship. I only understand roughly 10% of what they're talking about, but they seem to really like each other and talk a lot about what this could all look like. And I think so I think the personal relationship matters, but I also think it's a recognition and understanding that what's happening in Connecticut right now, which is a flywheel effect that's happening. We're seeing energy excitement, we're seeing economic acceleration, we're seeing population increases. It's just things are moving in a right direction. And when you look at other places, with no offense to California, a little bit of offense to Massachusetts, those economies just, they aren't growing the way they used to. And I think now, because of this post-pandemic thing that happened, because of this introduction of more flexibility on where to live and work, and you can collaborate more virtually or in person or in a hybrid way, that introduction of a new economic form of engagement has really benefited a place like Connecticut. And so I think everyone's sort of seeing that the same way I am. The reason why I got excited about all of this is that's when you invest. Mm-hmm. When you see all of those things starting to work together and to move in the right direction, that's when you say, okay, we're moving out of defense and we're moving to offense. We're now going to start really putting our foot in the gas and trying to move all of this forward. So I think that's why you've seen us, the state of Connecticut, really start to forward invest in our economy. I assume that's why you're starting to see Yale really forward invest in some of these industries. We're all looking at it and seeing the future is brighter, and we want to make sure we're a part of it.
And the last question I have before we open it up to the floor is, I think in all the discussions about economic development in Connecticut, we also at some point talk about workforce, both about creating the opportunity and the preparedness for good jobs for all Connecticut residents, and also ensuring that all the growing companies in Connecticut have access to the workforce. So if you might talk a little bit about how this connects to the governor's workforce initiative.
Yeah. So workforce is an enduring challenge. So if you look over time, we've had this job gap that it's always been, it fluctuates between sort of 70 and 90,000, but it's just been this enduring gap where we have more jobs available than get filled. Now, you never want that number to be zero, right? Every functioning economy has some gap, particularly if it's growing. But we really need to start thinking about two things. There's two ways to fill it. One is to produce more members of the workforce of our future. And so that's part of why I've stayed very close. I work very closely with UConn, work very closely with our state college system, just to make sure that we're connecting the dots between the needs, the forward needs of business and the graduates that those systems are producing. Yale, I'm happy to advise you guys. You don't ask me, and you don't need to. I think Yale's okay. But I want to make sure I really connect those two dots. And then the second thing is, honestly, you keep your people here, and you grow your population. If you look at our population trends, the way it typically works is we tend to lose people domestically, meaning we have an aging population, so we tend to lose more people domestically to places like Florida than we gain from places like Massachusetts and New York. I'll take that trade because we're gaining people at the beginning of their earnings journey and losing them at the end. So I'd rather everybody stay, but I'll take that trade. And then we make it up with international in-migration. That's the reason why our population is growing. And I think that's really important message to send. The more you see rhetoric out there, which is isolationist and protectionist and, you're not welcome here or you're not here for the right reasons, the more that rhetoric takes hold, the more that can deeply, fundamentally impact the economic engine that is the American dream. And so I spend a lot of time, as does our governor, saying, Connecticut, you are welcome here. If you want to come here and you want to build your family, you want to build your business, and you want to be part of our communities and help grow, you are welcome here. And I think we just need to continue to shout that from the rooftops. And then keep our young people here. Look, graduates used to go to New York to meet their spouses. I did it. I met my wife in a bar in New York City. I get it. But now, Connecticut is a place, particularly around some of our urban centers, where, a lot of people want this now. They want smaller, more livable, more walkable cities. New York will always be New York. But what we're seeing now in places like New Haven, by the way, in places like Stamford, hopefully at some point in places like Hartford and Bridgeport, we're seeing places where young people want to stay. They actually want to stay and start their careers. So I think you get all those things going and you really focus on training the workforce of our future, keeping our people here because they know they can build and grow here. And that's, again, why our population trends are continuing and why I think we need to continue to invest against it. The governor has announced, and we are investing, $145 million in workforce. So it's a significant investment for us.
And related investment, which we're not going to talk about today, is also investment in affordable housing, as well as transportation network, which all factors into that.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
$1.6 billion invested in housing. That's almost 3x what we've invested in housing historically.
Wow.
Massive investment in housing and a significant portion of that affordable.
Good. You mentioned the the challenge and the struggle of persuading your graduates to stay here and not be launching their companies. Anything further you want to say about workforce and the engineering school and workforce and your approach to that?
Well, it's kind of one brick at a time, I think, and I think the piece that we're working on, I think diligently, and we need all the help we can get, is to get some of the big companies to outpost in New Haven, to see the opportunity to have their research arms close to the research going on in our labs. If those opportunities exist, it'll be much easier for the students to take internships along the way, next door, working in a lab, and that's kind of what starts to make it sticky, in my opinion. But I think you're right, Dan, that the COVID moment has also transformed the way the students think about their opportunity space, and so there's more easy connection that's made virtually. So there's a push-pull there in terms of what can happen, but if we can get our undergraduates really sticking around, working on their startup opportunities locally, then have the opportunities for them to move into incubation space of one sort or another. I really think New Haven is a great place, and they all love Yale. They want to stay here, so we should just give them the opportunity to do that.
Great. Let me open it up to the floor. Any questions you may have for our panelists? In the top row.
Hi, Fred Elmy. I'm an EIR here at Yale. You mentioned aero and defense, and you didn't name the companies, but the manufacturing we do have in Connecticut. We also know that there's a shift going on in the defense space a bit, and even the aero with drones and unmanned submarines and all those kind of things. What are we doing in Connecticut to attract that business? Now, maybe we're not going to build a plane here, but there's a whole lot of parts that have to go into that plane that we could build here in Connecticut. So just, I think that's a big space here, and with all of our defense experience, you think, we would have that attraction.
Yeah, so let me describe it in a little bit more detail. So 12.6% of our economy is in manufacturing. And you may say to yourself, like at least I did, why does a state in the Northeast with high input prices, high energy costs, high cost of labor, why is there such a significant percentage of manufacturing in the state of Connecticut? By the way, 12% is higher than any other state in the region, and for us it's growing. Everywhere else is declining. And the reason why is exactly what you just described. We have a 100-plus year history in innovation around our national defense. We have 3 large primes here, which are electric boat and around submarines. We've got Pratt, which makes jet engines, and then Sikorsky, which makes military helicopters. Now, that's what everybody kind of looks at and knows. What I can tell you also is underneath that are all of the supply chains feeding those companies. The reason why our manufacturing sector has thrived is because we made it part of our national priority to make sure that the supply chains feeding our national defense are more local. That makes all the sense in the world, and Connecticut has benefited from it. Now, what our gentleman is describing is now the shift from manned to unmanned. And I think you said that aircraft might not be built here, and I would say, yeah, it will. Yeah, it will, because I actually think, we already make a lot of the end products already. We are doing final assembly of submarines. We are doing final assembly of helicopters. I see absolutely no reason why the machines themselves will not be finalized here, and we are working very closely, not only with our large primes, but also with the supply chains I described, to make sure that we participate in this shift towards the future. Sikorsky, unfortunately, it's public knowledge. They did have a large contract towards that end, which the Army just decided to go in a different direction. Nothing to do, I don't think, specific about Connecticut or specific about Sikorsky. But I still think all of these companies are now moving towards that future. So we're continuing to invest in the workforce to make sure that innovation can happen here, and I'm actually very confident that it will.
Over this side.
Thank you so much. Hi, Leon Rosenblatt. I'm also an AIR here. I'm getting an echo, but we'll talk through it. One trend that I think has been widely discussed is a winner-take-all hub model for some of the key technologies. We see it most clearly in Silicon Valley, in fintech in New York. And there are certainly ways to fight that different locales have. What do you guys think are the dynamics that would help a small place like Connecticut, New Haven, compete with those winner-take-all dynamics that are occurring, because of reduction in cost of education technology and various network effects. I understand that you've touched on some of them already, but I'd love to hear a little bit more depth on your thoughts. Thanks.
You want to start? No.
Sure. Look, I think the dynamic you described around winner-take-all does happen in industries in which you see incredibly strong network effects. Those are industries in which scale matters because that reduces production costs, and so you start to see real focus and localization. But particularly in technology and in this world where I think there actually is more fluidity in labor markets, I don't think in a winner-take-all mentality. I think in a focus on where you have a right to win. That's where I talk about comparative advantage is, we should focus our efforts and focus our resources, both capital and human capital, on the industries in which we feel like we've got that real comparative advantage. That's why the strategy I've described is so focused on not only the industries where I think we have that advantage, but also on the technology that I think will fundamentally impact them.
And I would just say internally to Yale, we've kind of taken that approach as well. I mean, we're really, if you kind of pick apart the science strategy, it was strong investment, transformative investment in technologies where we had top level, absolutely first rate human capital, but we lacked the facilities to really leverage that capital in an appropriate manner relative to our strength. So something like quantum, I mean, we knew we had the goods in terms of the people. What we didn't have, what we lacked, was the first-rate physical science facilities, and that was the key recommendation in the science strategy that you're now seeing start to take shape on the north end of campus, the Physical Sciences and Engineering building. Likewise, I think if you look at an area like data science, where we've had significant investment, that's less physically intensive, but it was with a recognition that with the law school, with the Jackson School for Global Affairs, and frankly, with the computer science department, that you have a catalytic opportunity to take Yale's brand and have it be recognized as, okay, this is where we're investing in the areas of data science and AI that have profound social application. And that also applies to connections with the law school, for example. So I think that's a recognition that we do have, if not a winner-take-all approach, at least a way to leverage what we bring to the table in a strong manner.
And let me comment on quantum for a minute, just because I think this is actually a really good example of, even if you're looking 5, 10, whatever years out it might be in terms of commercial applications, why I think Connecticut has a real right to win. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to kind of take you through an analogy. I work for the government, so I'm allowed to be a little bit loose with the details. So bear with me. But if you look at some of the invention that has occurred here, if you zoom in on a nuclear submarine, if you zoom in on a photolithography machine, by the way, show of hands, who knows what a photolithography machine is? There's a lot of nerds in this room. Fellow nerds. I'm glad you're all here. For those who didn't put your hand up, those are the machines that make semiconductors. ASML, the global market leader, by the way, 100% market share in semiconductor fabrication. Their North American headquarters is right here in Wilton, Connecticut. So if you zoom in on these incredible inventions, I would argue what you see is the same skill set. They exist at the intersection of next generation material sciences, electrical engineering, and mechanical engineering. That is the same thing as quantum. So again, I'm being loose with the details here. I acknowledge they're incredibly different in terms of their science, in terms of their innovations. But at the end of the day, that's where Connecticut has comparative advantage. If you said to me, I want to put a widget maker, in Connecticut, I'd say you're crazy. Costs of energy are too high, et cetera, et cetera. But if you say to me, I want to create and scale something incredibly complicated here that's really, really hard to do, not only hard to do, but hard to do at scale, that's what we do. And that's why I say, if winner take all, I try not to spend much time worrying about that. I worry about where do we have the right to win, and are we thinking forward enough to make sure our resource deployment is optimal?
Albert Green.
This is Al Green, the CEO of Quantum CT. So he's now going to tell you how everything I said was just crazy.
It's all right, all good.
He's changing his business cards to quantum AI.
So it's wonderful to hear the strength of Connecticut's R1 institutions. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you all are doing as it relates to, say, the state college system, and also Slightly separate topic, and K through 12, which is what leads to the people that are going to hopefully attend Yale and attend UConn, et cetera.
Yeah, I can comment on. So I do work very closely with our state college system, and let me say something that is somewhat can be at times controversial in certain circles, and certainly might be as I sit here and say this at Yale. And I don't want to completely causally relate with our state college system because it's not all they do. But I do wonder if at times, we've just culturally put so much pressure on the concept of a 4-year degree being a prerequisite for success. And if you actually, I think, again, as a society, I'm not trying to be classist here as someone who has benefited from not one but two degrees, but if you step back and just do the math on what's required to attend some of these schools and what the long-term career proposition is, and then you look at some of these incredible industries, incredible industries. Now I get to know them, right? Where you can go through an apprenticeship program and a 2-year with 2 years of academic support and come out with an incredible life. You can take the vacations, you can raise your family, you can have an incredible life, and it is not a failure. It's an incredible success. I just think sometimes we need to get to not only those students but get to the parents and say, take some of the pressure off this concept that whether or not you attend a 4-year school and end up with a liberal arts degree is somehow a prerequisite for success. I just think that we over-indexed on that a little bit. And so one of the things I work with now amongst all of these academic institutions is I want to make it cool again to have one of these degrees where, we visited Germany on an international trade mission and we learned about their apprenticeship programs over there. It's aspirational. Yeah. If you get into one of these programs, your parents aren't embarrassed to tell their friends. It's the opposite. They can't wait to shout it from the rooftops. That's a cultural shift I really think we need to think about and work on, because I actually forget about business. I don't think we're doing some of our students a good service.
Yeah, I want to echo that very wholeheartedly with a personal anecdote, which is that my eldest child was a kid with enough learning differences that he was not performing very well in a standard public high school, ended up in kind of an internship-based high school in Providence, ended up going to Southern Connecticut for his first year and transferring. But the point is that there was enough space in the system that he could be a part of something that was much more vocationally focused, use that to sort of springboard his way through a program that was not tailored towards AP this, AP that, and then, ultimately launched into what we hope will be a successful career. So, I completely agree that, especially as we see these kids that are coming in with all of this thirst for engineering know-how and technical know-how, that maybe having to get a Yale liberal arts degree shouldn't necessarily be a part of that per se. We should actually be thinking about these as really valuable trajectories and develop the infrastructure. And I think the Southern Connecticut system he was a part of was first rate. It was absolutely fantastic. Hats off to those people.
I'll just add to that especially within the quantum space, there has been a comprehensive engagement and thinking about how all levels of the educational system at K-12 level as up through college and non-traditional programs, how they fit in, and the role of community colleges, and recognize there's a range of skills needed here, some of which will be more just having quantum literacy in the same way that all of us will need to become AI literate in work that is not directly AI, but is taking advantage of that technology. So we'll have to that type of quantum literacy, but also recognizing there are a lot of manufacturing jobs in the state that will require some level of skill of a certain kind, and different level of skill to be an engineer and maybe to be an industrial engineer to scale it up as well as be the innovator. So there's been that broad engagement of the different components of the educational system and planning. And I think that's been a good sign, a plan to go forward on that. Let's go right here.
Thank you. Dan, my name's Chris Kolstad. I worked at Command Corporation for a number of years in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Yep. And for those in the room that haven't heard of it, and I'm sure there's many of you, it's a pretty decent-sized aerospace and defense manufacturer in Connecticut. One of the factors that was always a big hurdle for us is energy. And you mentioned that in Connecticut, 12.5% economy is advanced manufacturing, despite the energy costs. And when we think forward in terms of data centers, cloud computing, AI, and so forth, energy will become even more important.
Yep.
So my question is, what are your thoughts on an energy strategy for Connecticut? And what are we doing at the highest levels of government to think about the next 10 years? Or I think you said we look at 50 years and invest in 35 years. So what's on the table today? Because I think it ultimately becomes the constraint point, right?
Yeah. No, it already is. So one minor correction, you said 12.5%, it's 12.6%. I would say who's counting, but it's me who's counting. And I would say, and it's growing. So manufacturing as a percent of our GDP got as high as 17%. That was in the kind of buildup coming out of 9/11. Then it got as low as 10%. So it was a massive drag on our economy for the better part of a decade. And then it started growing again as we started reprioritizing this concept of the supply chains feeding our national defense primes being more local, their growth being more local. That growth has happened despite our industrial energy prices being 117% higher than the rest of the United States. Think about that for a second. I can sell a lot of things. I can sell our workforce because we've got incredible high-skilled labor. But I can't sell a megawatt that is 2 times as expensive as the rest of the United States. Now, I'll tell you what I think, but what I will also tell you is I run economic development. I'm not involved with energy. We have a separate agency that leads that, and I'm involved as a fellow commissioner, but it's not part of my portfolio directly. And what I will say is politically unpopular. Now, I can say it because I'm actually an appointee. I'm not asking for anyone's vote, so I can be unhinged and tell you exactly what I think. And here's what I think, and I'm going to say it despite being an environmentalist. I think we as a society need to continue to invest in a renewable future. We need to be focused on it. We are focused on it in the state of Connecticut. So 17% of our wholesale energy market is now renewables. That's up from 0 not so long ago. So that's progress. And then nuclear, separate from that number, is 22%. Now, nuclear for a long period of time became a dirty word. It became a dirty word for all the reasons that we know. But I cannot see a renewable future in our lifetimes that doesn't include nuclear. The reason why it's not included in renewables is because it has the rods need to be dealt with. It has disposables, but it's non-carbon producing. Now here's the challenge, and here's the part that becomes politically challenging. Nuclear is part of our future, I believe. We are a nuclear state. We have a nuclear power plant. We are not right now investing in small modular nuclear, which will be the future of nuclear production. And I think we, as a region, because again, this is a regional problem, not just the state of Connecticut, we need to start investing in those solutions meaningfully and dramatically and soon. Until we get there, I believe that we should stop relaxing the constraint of relative energy prices. I think we continue to invest in a renewable future, but the timelines we set up were goals. 2030, 2050, they were goals. And I can get us there, but energy is going to cost you 10 times as much as it does today. The 10 times I made up, please don't write that down and tweet that out. Mm-hmm. But my point is, if you relax the constraint, I can get us there quickly. But I think it should be the opposite. I think timelines should be dictated by relative price. Let's invest in a renewable future. Let's make sure we get there for our kids and our grandkids, but let's not sacrifice our economy on the way. And right now, that's essentially what this region has done. 15 years ago, we started making decisions that were aligned against those timelines. I don't blame anyone for it. I think we were really trying to create the incentive to get it done quickly. And we stopped letting natural gas into the region. I'm not talking about lighting a bunch of oil and coal on fire. I'm talking about natural gas incremental natural gas as a way to get prices down while we forward invest in nuclear to get our future carbon free. That's what I think has to happen. What I just said doesn't get people elected in the state of Connecticut. So what I just did was render myself politically non-viable. And I'm happy I did it because I think people need to start saying this. China produces more greenhouse gases every single day than all of New England emits in a year. All we're doing is wrapping ourselves in a Pyrrhic blanket. We're not solving the problem. We're just sacrificing our economic progression. Few people want to clap.
Applause. Yeah.
Anyone clapping right now is also not going to run for office in the state of Connecticut. But again, I think that's the dialogue we need to be having.
Well, as a tenured professor, I have the luxury of, not having to worry about what anyone thinks. Although as a dean, perhaps I don't have that luxury in perpetuity. I share the concern, Dan, of yours in a local manner, which is that we've set targets as a university for being carbon neutral. We are acting on those in a way that I think is important for signaling. It's important for our actual carbon footprint. But it's important also to acknowledge the trade-offs that come with it. It does slow things down. It does mean that the budget is, kind of 50% again on any building project if you're drilling geothermal wells underneath it. It has impacts. It does make a difference, obviously, but there are trade-offs, and there are other ways that we can develop new technologies along the way that it might slow down. So it's important to be clear-sighted about these things as you go into them, even at a local level.
Up in the top row.
Hi, two things. One, you talk about nuclear. We have a 60, 70-year history of nuclear packaged power plants in this state. Perhaps we could either recycle the old subs into packaged power plants or at least draw on that technology and expand it for this crossover period before we get to full renewables. Possibility. The other question is related to the School of Engineering with all the manufacturing and trying to develop hubs. Are we doing anything now to develop relationships with the companies in the state and in the surrounding towns, these hundreds and hundreds of defense contractors and other technology-based companies, to integrate them with our students, with the student projects, and to the future? Thank you.
You go first, and I'll comment.
Sure. Okay. So we have a very active group that's working on building industry relations, but that cuts across, from the Googles and Microsofts of the world, where we have significant investment now in the School of Engineering and in the Roberts Fund in the form of cloud credits and other things, and lots of conversations ongoing about how to support research. But yeah, I share the view, and I think we have done great work to build relationships with our local partners. ASML has come to campus multiple times. They're doing recruiting work. We have internships there sort of for the first time in a while. Stanley Black & Decker we're having conversations with. There's a range of industries around the state that we're engaged with. Part of it is that we need that academic lever of the capstone project at the undergraduate level, and we're looking at the opportunity to do master's degrees that would be more narrowly focused on professional opportunities in the state. I think this has been an omission in terms of our academic structure. We haven't had a professional master's program in the School of Engineering. Every other School of Engineering has these. So we're in conversations now about how to develop that, precisely with the goal of taking the great science that's happening in the lab and providing a cohort of people that are taking that science and thinking about how to apply it immediately on their graduation with a master's degree in industry in the state, because that'll be part of a capstone relationship that they develop over the course of their degree. So we're active in the space. We're trying to change the culture again, like I said, to be much more focused on that local contribution.
And I want to give a quick anecdote on this concept of that we have nuclear submarines here with a nuclear reactor. Why not leverage that infrastructure? And one of the fun stories I have in this time in public service is I got to take a ride on a nuclear submarine. This was one of the cooler experiences ever. One of the few things that makes my kids think I'm cool is we got to go out and meet a nuclear submarine as it was coming in and then ride it on the sail, which is the top part, all the way into the subbase. And we took the tour and we were leaving, and the woman who had given us the tour said, "Good to meet you, sir. I'm going to go shut down a nuclear reactor." And I said, "Well, how about you leave it on and plug it into the grid? I'll go get my extension cord." And she looks at me and she goes, "Sir, they don't work that way." Now, while that is true, and why I do lament the fact that we have at any time 4 or 5 nuclear reactors that aren't powering our grid but are here, that is the concept of small modular reactors. That these are incredibly safe, incredibly efficient, again, non-carbon producing, yet right now aren't classified as Class 1 renewables in the state. One of the things you mentioned, data centers. Now, I don't think data centers are necessarily a meaningful part of our economic strategy, because I just think you can access compute remotely. But that being said, when Yale was looking for compute, had to go to Massachusetts, right? Because Massachusetts has a hydro-powered compute cluster, which is a class 1 renewable. Even if we were to put compute powered by nuclear, it wouldn't have helped them hit their goals because it's not considered class 1. These are the kind of things where I'm like, this is just common sense. Like, why don't we look at some of these things and say, there is a path forward here. Let's just do what's common sense. Let's deal with the fact that there are certain sectors that are passionate about certain issues. That's okay. That's what democracy is. We'll manage through that debate and try to get to the right place.
In the top row.
Have you seen any programs that combine the trades with technology, or is that something that you're particularly working on?
Absolutely. CCAT. So the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology, very important partner here in the state of Connecticut. They do exactly what you just described, which is they are looking at advanced manufacturing techniques and the technology that fuels it and make sure that they're helping partnering with not only our trades, but also our educational institutions to train our workforce on leveraging those. By the way, I should say, I mentioned there are 3 finalists for innovation clusters. CCAT is involved with the one in and around Hartford.
Any other questions for Dan and Jeff?
Or for Rich. Somebody asked Rich a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm an undergrad in the School of Engineering, Chemical Engineering. And I do really appreciate everything that you guys have said. And I'm also writing an article, so if you don't want to be quoted on anything, let me know.
I tried to stop that a long time ago. It never works.
So I'm curious, you both, Dr. Brock and O'Keefe, have mentioned centralizing impact in Connecticut, which I think is really important. I'm curious what the strategy is for the split on global versus local impact, because Yale's obviously a profound research institution focused on, impact beyond. And that obviously can start locally, but I'm curious if there's conversation or maybe a strategy on how we're impacting both locally and globally and what that looks like.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're writing this article. I think that we need to lean in fully to Yale's role as a global technology leader, as a global force for research in the world. The challenges we're facing right now in terms of the narratives around the role of universities globally are profound, and we need to speak up about them and the importance. We're starting to do that. We're starting to see that across the university landscape, and I think it's absolutely critical. I also think it's important to talk about the national sphere as well. I think that there's a sense in which the work that we do as researchers is patriotic. It is about foregoing a certain kind of potential economic gain that might come from being directly engaged in commercialization for the sake of the teaching mission, for the sake of building scholarship, that the whole community, it's usually federally funded, that's for the whole community. And we've operated under the presumption that this is for the good of the country. That's why we do it. That's why we took the job. So I think that message needs to get out, that we're here serving the community, we're here serving the local community, we're here serving the state, we're also serving the country. And that's part of our global position. So that serves the world because we feel the country is a force for good in the world. So, let's not mince words about that as a community. I think that that's an incredibly important point.
And I'll just mention our own engagement in global affairs and global commerce. We are part of a broader global ecosystem, and we want to make sure we foster those relationships and grow them where it's logical. And the governor referenced this. We think it's increasingly important in times where the federal government is increasingly harder to predict and where there's more volatility. It is that lack of predictability, which, by the way, I think is a feature, not a bug, but that is starting to make it harder for some of this investment to take place. People don't want to invest when they're uncertain of the future. That's all the reasons why I talked about those positive flywheels we're seeing in the state of Connecticut. That's why it's so important to get that message out, because that's where people want to invest. Despite that somewhat volatile backdrop, we are making it very clear to our international trading partners that states are left to a high degree of autonomy in leveraging our economic affairs. The governor mentioned the trade mission we did with Indra Nooyi to India. Indra, by the way, for those who don't know her, she was the CEO of Pepsi, is an absolutely incredible person, is a Connecticut resident, and traveling around India with her is like traveling around the United States with Taylor Swift. Like little girls run up to her and ask her for her autograph. She's like that well-known and that famous, and it was incredible being there with her because she helped open a lot of doors and I think will really help accelerate that particular relationship. The year prior, we went to Germany, which is our top trading partner, both in terms of exports and foreign direct investment back. We have many companies. The aerospace industry has come up a number of times. We have many companies that are helping in and around that industry. What we're saying to all of those partners right now is, despite all the headlines, despite the lack of predictability, just know that we are here as a consistent partner, and that Connecticut is a place not only where you can continue to do business with confidence, but where your employees can raise their families in an incredible environment, and where we will protect and defend our values.
So I will close with two final comments. First, to thank Dan and Jeff, and I hope you'll join me in expressing our deep appreciation for thoughtful conversation.
Thank you all.